Good morning. If you're on the West Coast, good afternoon anywhere else. My name is Lloyd Johnson. I'm the moderator for today's session. And welcome to the third in the series, 10 Attributes of AI Forward Law Departments, Part 3 Skill Set. Before we get any deeper, let's hear from our panelists, Gio and then Escor. Gio, first, if you'll share with us where you're streaming from today, and then tell us a little bit about you and your role.
Thanks, Lloyd. My name is Gio DeLuca. I am the Senior Director of Legal Operations at Lowe's Companies, Inc., and I am currently located in Charlotte, North Carolina.
And Escor.
Escor Adam, Major Managing Director at Major Lindsay in Africa. I'm streaming today from Basking Ridge, New Jersey, and I sit between our New Jersey and our New York offices.
All righty. So, today's webinar is brought to you by Justice Bid, two offerings in particular, JB Select, which automates the RFP process, and Rate Review, which applies AI to some of the information and inputs into billing. So today we actually have a new moderator, and I'm sorry, not a new moderator, but a person that we're going to add to the conversation, and that is an AI tool called Notebook LM. And we are going to listen and get a quick 5-minute overview of the topics that will be discussed today. So without further ado, Notebook LM for today's overview.
Diving deep into the incredible 5-year transformation of the head of legal operations. We're talking about a role that's gone from a quiet back office function to a strategic powerhouse right in the C-suite. So let's jump right in with a really powerful metaphor that our source material uses because it perfectly captures the challenge this role faces today. Here's the plan. We'll start with this idea of driving in 3 lanes. Then we'll get into a direct comparison of the role then versus now. We'll look at what the new job descriptions are asking for, the skills you absolutely need, and then we'll follow the money. Finally, we'll wrap up with a big question for leaders. All right, first up, let's get a handle on the new complex demands being placed on these leaders. Think of it like this. The best legal ops leaders are driving in 3 lanes at the same time. You've got the strategic Autobahn, where you're flying high with the C-suite, talking big picture vision. Then there's the tactical highway, where you're executing plans with other departments. And you can't forget the surface roads. That's the day-to-day, in the weeds stuff. The real pros, the ones who are absolutely crushing it, can switch between these lanes without even thinking. So what does this change actually look like? I mean, how different can a role get in just 5 years? Well, as you're about to see, the differences are huge. First off, the mindset has totally flipped. It used to be all about being a cost controller, just cutting the budget. Now it's about being a value strategist. The conversation isn't how much can we save? It's how can the legal department actually help the business grow and create value? And when it comes to tech, forget just being a tool implementer who installs some software. The job today is to be a platform architect and an AI strategist. It's the difference between, plugging in a toaster and actually designing the entire electrical grid for the city. This table really just lays it all out, doesn't it? The entire role has been redefined. You're not just a department manager anymore. You're an enterprise integrator, connecting legal to finance, IT, and HR. And maybe my favorite one, you've gone from being a tactical communicator with spreadsheets to an executive storyteller, turning data into stories that the board can actually understand and act on. Okay, so that's the theory. But how does this play out in the real world? Let's look at what companies are actually putting in their job descriptions. You can see the evolution right here. Around 2020, the job was about foundational tech, like e-billing. Fast forward to 2025, and they're demanding AI expertise and serious financial modeling skills. And get this, an MBA is now often preferred over a law degree. That's a huge tell. Even the reporting structure has changed, explicitly calling out collaboration with the CFO and other execs. That seat at the table is now official. So if you want to succeed in this really demanding new environment, what do you actually have to be good at? It really comes down to these 3 pillars. You absolutely have to have deep legal knowledge to be credible. You need to be fluent in technology and AI, and you have to master finance, budgeting, forecasting, the whole 9 yards. You can't just be a mile wide and an inch deep on this stuff anymore. You need real depth in all 3 areas. And on top of those hard skills, you have to be, well, multilingual. You need to be able to talk strategy to the CEO, numbers to the CFO, and tech to the IT team, and do it all in a way that each of them understands. It's a massive communications challenge. Okay, so we've talked about a huge shift in responsibility and skills. And there's one place where that becomes crystal clear: their paycheck. Yeah, you're seeing that right. Data from the executive search for a major Lindsay in Africa shows that pay for top tier legal ops leaders has absolutely skyrocketed. We're talking target cash compensation for senior roles now pushing past $400,000. And this chart just puts it in stark relief. Look at that jump. Total cash compensation has more than doubled in less than a decade, going from about 190 in 2017 to over $400,000 today. If you ever needed proof of this role's new strategic importance, that's it right there. And this isn't just one data point. The whole market is confirming the trend. Bright Flag found an 18% jump in pay just year over year. The Association of Corporate Counsel found that legal ops directors are now earning more than senior attorneys. And maybe the biggest signal of all, nearly 80% of leaders say they are paying way above market rate for people who have those AI and data analytics skills. So, after all this, the big question is, what does this massive evolution really mean for your organization? And that really brings us to the bottom line. The head of legal ops role has fundamentally changed. It is not going back. The data, the job descriptions, the pay, it all points to a new reality. So the final thought we'll leave you with is this: are you hiring someone to solve yesterday's problems? Or are you hiring a true strategic leader who can help you win tomorrow?
All right, so now that we have a foundation, Gio, you put a lot of time and thought into the table, and I want to take everybody back. There was a table that had five different two columns and five different rows. Gio, would you share with us your observations and your personal experience about the evolution of the role of the head of legal ops, which for today's session we'll call HELO? What does that look like over the course of the last 5 years?
Thanks, Lloyd. The role has changed quite a bit. When I think back when I started in my first position of Director of Legal Ops back in 2018, I was a tool implementer. One of my customers, and when I say customers, it'd be an attorney that would say, I'm looking for a tool that does X. And in a silo, I would go to market and look and see what can we possibly buy, what can we build, and I would bring that back in. Now, fast forward now 8 years later, I'm not looking at individual tools. Rather, I would consider myself a platform architect. And by that, I mean I'm looking at tools to not solve a single issue, but really the greater ecosystem of tools that we use, not just within the legal department, but across the entire enterprise. And if we can link tools that sit within legal to things that are in finance or HR or compliance or strategic sourcing, that will be broader in greater efficiencies, not just for the legal department, but for the enterprise. Secondly, is it's not just about cost control anymore. Back in the day, it was about modifying outside counsel guidelines such that we're reducing spend, putting in cost control and cost reduction strategies, implementing process improvement. That's no longer the case. I'm having to demonstrate my value, and I use that term as a term of art, my value in things that are more than just the spend management. The impact that I have in the department isn't just the dollars and cents. It's also helping shape the culture of the department, the processes, the workflows, and all of that, but really how we operate day to day. Third, it's not just about being a manager within the department. I would say that, perhaps the most fundamental thing I do is being an enterprise connector and connecting legal to other parts of the business that sit outside of legal. The voice in the context of speaking about our departmental and non-departmental spend, as well as the voice, to our IT teams and the C-suite that sits across the various departments in the organization. Another area in which this has changed is process up. In the past was about process optimization. And it's not just that anymore. It's really AI and data transformation on not just leveraging the latest in legal technology, but really putting AI and embedding it in every single aspect of every workflow that we do. And finally, the director of legal ops isn't just a support role anymore. It is really, and the video I think says this very well, was that I'm advisor to our chief legal officer as well as the C-suite, in not just things related to technology, but just really how we should be doing things as an enterprise.
Excellent. And Gio, one of the last lines in the table talked about in 2020 being a tactical communicator, and then in 2025 being an executive storyteller. And it's so appropriate. If you could just take a couple seconds to talk about the training that you're literally going through as we speak.
Yes, it's a very topical point about what it means to be a storyteller. The story told, 5, 8 years ago was looking at spreadsheets, doing quarterly business reviews, monthly reviews, talking about what we've spent. And today it's translating that data into executive narratives and demonstrating how legal really helps drive business outcomes for the enterprise itself. It's creating well-drafted PowerPoint presentations to show what that value is. The story isn't just looking at the numbers. It's really providing the underlying value. It's regularly presenting to the C-suite, something that didn't necessarily exist 5 years ago. I used to get excited when I would go present to a C-suite executive. It's now part of almost the day-to-day, where you'd have many C-suite executives in the room that I'm now presenting to.
Excellent. So, Escor, in our prep sessions, a number of different times, you mentioned that there's an increasing number of conversations that you're having with general counsel about the HELO role. And would you like to share with us some of the insights that you've gleaned from those conversations?
One of the things that comes across in these conversations is really the sort of the expanded scope of the role and the expanded gravitas needed for the person that sits in this chair. The first thing that comes to mind is reporting in line and really having a seat at the table. So the general counsels typically come in a frame that they need someone who's truly a partner. Gio just used the word advisor. It's someone who's comfortable advising at that C-suite level, not just within the legal function, but truly across various functions, the CFO, the COO, IT as much as needed. Um, Moving on from the next data point, the next thing here is the scope of the mandate. General counsels are telling us about the need for a true partner, someone who's transformative, someone who could be a change agent rather than process improvement or system management. And the next thing is just the importance of helping, sort of the timing of when this person is being brought into the fold and the importance of that moment. It's coming at a time where an organization is facing rapid growth, whether it's a merger, whether it's organic growth, whether it's a shift in a business model that requires more complexity to the legal work that's being done. But there's a real intentionality about when this person is brought in and the expected outcome of their arrival. Then the last thing here is just the importance of cross-functional influence. So Gio mentioned the importance of being visible and having a voice in various matters that relate to this particular role. And it's an expectation, it's sort of a demand for this person. It's being able to walk into a room and speak very fluently in a manner that speaks to the CFO and other members of the finance team or the HR team on a particular issue by being data driven, being able to point to value, and communicating a real story for why legal should sort of have the keys to the kingdom in this particular matter. Then the very last thing, we're sort of looking for very ambitious people. We're looking for people now who want to interface with the executive leadership team. That's a very drastic move from someone who was expected to really just manage more of what had been a back office function in a way.
Excellent. And you've been kind enough to put together two job descriptions. And the first one is, and I'll let you describe, but I think this
Yeah.
is the pre-AI enabled.
So a bit of context as to how we created these two documents. We looked at a data pool of essentially 5 searches that we did over a 5-year period. The hope here was to get some trends. One, what type of companies are actually coming to us and asking for the skill set? Two, what are the commonalities and what they're requiring initially, and how has that shifted over time? In addition to that, just from our conversations, you, Gio, myself, and some research, we did some additional things to make the next version of the job description that you see, the AI-enabled version, really speak to what the future of the role will look like. So starting with this document, you notice it's anonymized in a way that just tells you that it's a multinational that plays across various sectors, whether it's financial services, healthcare, insurance, etc. The key thing here, just going through the actual job description itself, key responsibilities, operational and strategy department, performance. When you really dive into this, you will see that in a sense, it's sort of vendor management. It's cost centric. It's speaking to a lot of the things that were mentioned in the video and what Gio mentioned earlier in our conversation. But just pulling this up here for myself as well. It's managing outside counsel spend. It's really thinking about what tech partners you should bring in from a vendor perspective as opposed to building out that ecosystem that Gio hinted at. It's thinking about providing KPIs and a dashboard. So this is the backwards looking version of that document. As we think more holistically and looking a little bit forward, as you think about what is expected for the person who steps into the role today, the first thing you would notice, Lloyd, if you don't mind just scrolling all the way to the top of the document.
Of the AI enabled?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
got it.
The first thing you would notice is we've actually changed the title slightly. So it's now Director of Legal Operations and AI Enablement, really to speak to the technical aspect of this role. It's no longer just that back office function. It's now taking legal and bringing it to the consumer, the internal customer at the point of sale, if you don't mind me using that terminology. Everything else sort of stays consistent at the top of this document. It's still a multinational playing across various sectors. The position overview shifts very slightly. There's more language now talking about AI enablement and the expected impact of AI. But the real shift here is when you get down to the key responsibility section. And if you look at just the second bullet point there, it mentions that this person is expected to interface with the C-suite, not just the chief legal officer or the general counsel, but truly the chief financial officer. And this is going to get to something that we'll touch on later in our conversation. But in order to have an effective and a conversation with the CFO where you actually are driving decision making, you have to have a certain level of gravitas and you have to have the ability to speak in a language that they understand, right? So it's being quantitative and not just qualitative. We can't speak with there cannot be any vagueness about the actual value that legal is driving, because when we talk about the cost that come to the potential litigation or cost that comes to the new FTE, we are talking about pure numbers. So in order to balance that equation, we have to also show that value in actual numbers. So just going a little bit deeper down this document, I want to sort of fast forward to something that may not be apparent just yet, but because of the way this role has evolved and because of the things that are expected of this person, we're now thinking about soft skills that we will typically expect for someone who is at the deputy general counsel level or someone who's in a role reporting directly, a pure legal role reporting directly into the general counsel. And this is someone who's very comfortable interfacing with the executive leadership team members. So it's communication, it's that gravitas that I mentioned earlier. It's the ability to really articulate certain things in a manner that tells a story and creates a narrative around what needs to be done. It's someone who's working cross-functionally, and also it's someone who has the ability to just go into the actual core technical skill set to build that ecosystem by being somewhat tech native and being able to understand everything needed for that particular pillar while touching on everything else. Pure legal know-how and knowledge, financial acumen or business acumen, and a good understanding of the business and business outcomes that are expected for this particular division.
Anything else on this in the job description itself?
Yeah, let's scroll down to the very end of this job description. So I just touched on the leadership and interpersonal competencies briefly, but right at the very end, we actually add something called the tridisciplinary core competencies, and it sort of loops back to what I was just touching on. These are the three pillars of the future of this role. It is legal knowledge, legal know-how, it's tech fluency, and financial literacy. This is a trend or a topic that we're going to touch on several times during the course of our conversation. But as you think about what we expect of this person, it's taken someone who, again, had been managing that legal as a back office function and having them utilize this as their foundational skill sets to enable them to tell the story and bring legal to the front office or to the end, to the actual users in a more impactful way.
Gio, you've been sitting quietly. Would love to get your thoughts on what you see and how much this is consistent or inconsistent with your experience and that of your peers as it relates to the impact that AI is having on the role.
I think that's spot on. It really, you have to be trilingual. And depending on who your audience is. So it's absolutely right where you have to be able to speak technology. When I meet with my tech counterparts, I have to know the difference between a large language model, generative AI, and the different types of AI that could be used in workflows and be able to get into the weeds. When I'm speaking with my financial partners, it is really functioning as an accountant or more so in a financial role in forecasting and using terms of art that are unique to the financial sector when having those presentations. And of course, being in the legal department, I have to be able to speak to lawyers and translate technology and translate finance into a meaningful way that a lawyer can understand. And so it's being able to pivot or put on different hats depending on who the audience is. And of course, if you're presenting to the C-suite, you're wearing all three hats at once. So you have to be able to articulate the tech and the finance and the legal in a way that any one person could understand in the most simplistic way.
And Gio, in a recent conversation that I had with the general counsel, and I think this reflects the views of many, that there is ongoing tension between the CEO and the CFO as it relates to technology, especially AI. The CEO is saying, do it, we've got to do it. The CFO is saying we don't have the money for it. And so that in many instances, the general counsel have said that it is their expectation that the new age head of legal ops actually be not only an advocate for the legal department, but also an ambassador. Would you like to, and sometimes having to work through those tensions, would you like to speak through that?
Yeah, I love that term that it's an ambassador because in a sense I am the mouthpiece for the legal department to the tech department. And so it is really bridging the gap between two or three different pillars across the enterprise. And when I walk into a room and speak to tech, I appreciate that I'm representing not just my CLO, but the other, depending on the size of the department, dozens of attorneys or dozens of tech requests that might be made, and being a zealous advocate for my group. But I would also go as far as to say that it's also being an ambassador, not just of the tech folks. It's really, it's across the enterprise. It's the mouthpiece for the finance, for the technology, for the process improvement, and really driving AI and pushing other parts of the organization. And so I see myself a difference today compared to 5 years ago as I'll speak to HR or other departments about trying to leverage AI, showing them the value of if we do something, how it will impact and benefit not just the legal department, but those sectors as well, right? When we think about long-term integration, and I said earlier about being an architect across an ecosystem of technologies, if I'm able to walk into a room and speak to my HR business partners and leadership about a technology that we're trying to adopt in legal and be able to show the ROI to because there's going to be an integration somehow with Workday or whatever the platform might be, I am that ambassador. But that also requires, as any ambassador, you have to know how other countries operate. You have to know the other islands operate across the enterprise so that you really can be an effective ambassador.
Escort, I have a question for you in a minute, but first I just want to invite questions via the chat. So for all of you listening, we would love to see any questions that you have. So Escort, like to triple click on the question of competencies. You talked about soft skills such as creativity, visioning, influencing, executive communication. How do you, as an executive search professional, suss that out when you're interviewing candidates for this new and expanded role?
That's a great question. So I'm going to speak about the MLA model for doing search, because it really goes to how we discover these things about individuals, right? So But you typically utilize a two-touch process for our intake of a candidate into a search process. The first one is just establishing that the person actually has the substance and they have done the work needed to be credible in this space, right? So we may have a 30 or 45-minute phone or video conversation that focuses really on your core skill set. Once you've established that, then we want to get to know who you are and how you may show up in a certain situation. We typically arrange what could be a 45 to an hour long video call where we sort of present it as a behavioral interview and we just go through a series of questions that sort of get to who you are as a person, your what you believe your reputation may be amongst your colleagues, what you believe a detractor may say about you, how you may actually respond to a certain situation, or how you go about actually influencing decision making when you're not the person who really will make the actual decision, right? After that long 1 hour conversation, we have a good sense of who you are, the tension points, and we're able to really paint a clear picture as to where your interpersonal skill set falls within the ideal candidate profile for this particular role. So I hope that was responsive to the question, but I'm happy to double click on that as much as needed.
Absolutely, and absolutely. And, there's nothing like knowing the questions to an exam before you go into it. And you've given people a roadmap on that. All right, now let's talk about money. You've done a lot of work to be able to look at compensation trends. The overview video was great because it was short and to the point, but there are a number of very significant points that we need to drill down on because compensation, like anything, is very nuanced. So, where do you want to start the conversation about compensation?
Well, we'll start with the MLA data set that was utilized in building that video. So that came from eight searches over a 8-year period. That with the first search, the total cash comp was essentially sub 200. It was a $190,000 base salary, and I believe it was a 25% annual bonus. As we look at the end of that particular data set, the most recent search, which happened in the second quarter of this year, we're looking at a total cash comp in the 400s plus LTI structured as a mix of RSUs and common stock. That's a massive leap in just actual numbers. But what's driving that is just the expanded scope of the role. To help just supplement MLA's data, we've done some research and we're seeing a number of sources externally point to just massive annual year-over-year growth in this particular role. So from 2024 to 2025, head of legal operational cash comp grew by 18%. We expect that to continue to grow, and the reasons are one, the expanded scope of the role over that 8-year period at its reference. It's gone beyond just managing budgets and being a systems integrator in the sense of actually bringing on vendors to truly being the architect that Gio has referenced several times. Secondly, if this role now has more visibility in terms of actually being in front of C-suite execs, it calls for a very different person. It's no longer that back office individual. A lack of interpersonal skills, a lack of emotional intelligence is no longer acceptable. As we get deeper into that candidate pool to find a person who really fits this new mold, you start to touch new levels of compensation than you had previously. And we can look at something else that's sort of driving this, and it's really just the number of private equity-backed companies who are now, one, preparing to go public, and in doing so, thinking about how they structure their legal departments. Typically, private equity companies and private equity-backed companies, they want the best of the best. And in order to get that, they typically have to write bigger checks to achieve that. And that's something that's somewhat driving compensation in this space, but we're starting to see that sort of permeate elsewhere.
Uh, Gio, I have a question for you in a minute, but Escort, still on the topic of conversation. Some general counsel that we talk to seem to struggle with the idea that given where comp levels for the Hilo role are going, that in many instances they will be paying the Hilo more than actual attorneys in the department. Any thoughts or observations you have with respect to that way of thinking?
Well, my first thought is you have to think about the value that having this person and truly having the right person in that chair brings to your department. If you only focus on the actual cost, the dollars coming out annually to compensate this person, you're really missing more than 50% of the actual equation here, probably close to 80%. if you pay the right person the right number that incentivize them to come to your organization, it could truly be a transformative addition to the team. I don't know if it's fair to compare that transformation to having the right lawyer within that department, but they will actually assist you in getting the right lawyer, both internally and externally, in finding the right outside counsel to assist you in litigation strategy, managing the transaction, because of the actual ability to interpret data, implement that into a true narrative, and then an actual action plan for your team.
Gio, you were nodding. Please share.
I was nodding, and what I was thinking about in part of that discussion, I think perhaps one of the biggest ways that the role has changed and really legal operations as an actual thing is in the area of data analytics and more specifically predictive analytics. A question that I receive more today than I ever have before is around trying to prove what I would say non-falsifiable or something that's never happened. But for this, this is how much money we would have saved. Because we did this, this is how much money we've saved. Or if we do this, this is how much more money we're going to spend. And it's really, a data scientist, something that didn't exist in legal departments necessarily 5 or 10 years ago, and you're seeing that more and more often today, depending on the industry, to really understand, I have 1,000 fields in my e-billing tool or my matter management tool. What do I do with them? And so somebody who really understands how to leverage that data to get insights into not just looking at historically what we've done, but to use that to forecast. So for instance, a lawsuit comes in. Why are we not at the, if are you at the point where when a lawsuit comes in, you can say, this is how much it's going to cost us an outside counsel spend, and this is how much we're going to settle the matter for, and all the costs and that are involved in any type of litigation that comes in. You really need to understand data analytics to be able to get to that point and forecast based on what is probably a very large data set depending on the department. But yeah, that resonated really well with me is predictive analytics, as I'll call it.
As we all know, in the business press, there's all kinds of discussions about an AI bubble. There's an AI bubble, AI bubble. Escort, in the prep session, you were talking about there's a bit of AI inflation in terms of people talking about their AI capabilities and their experience in a way that doesn't necessarily meet reality. You'd like to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it kind of goes to the core of a lot of conversations we're having with our clients right now. It's very easy, one, to update your resume and put in all the AI buzzwords that enables your resume to get picked up by an applicant tracking system really quickly and get to the top of the pile. And then when the client meets this person and we get 5 or 10 minutes into the conversation, it becomes very clear that it's just plain buzzword bingo and actually have no real substance behind that. Um, I've recently had a conversation with someone who's in a hiring position who mentioned that they are thinking very strategically about how they test for true tangible results within this particular subset of this skill, right? So it's point to actual projects that you spearheaded. Tell us about your involvement. How did you drive change? How did you actually implement that change across the department so that we went from being AI curious to actually AI enabled in a sense, right? Gio just mentioned predictive analytics in terms of potential litigation, potential risk. How do you really, how do you tell a story that puts you in the center of that story and tell us about your ability to just replicate what you've done in the past year in a manner that's truly tech forward, as opposed to just sort of rinse and repeat in the exact same playbook that we've utilized for the last decade or so?
Excellent. And there's a question from one of the listeners. Does this position require specific credentials or would relevant experience be considered sufficient?
Should I take that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. That's a good question. In terms of specific experience, I still think that just legal know-how, one, is necessary, whether that comes from actually having a JD or having worked in the legal industry. That's just sort of the initial pillar. In addition to that, in order to become truly financially literate or have the business acumen to compete for this role effectively, you may want to consider going for an MBA or, at the bare minimum, taking enough classes to allow you to actually speak with some level of conviction in this world and be engaged. Have the ability to essentially dive into a 10K, have the ability to surmise what you're reading in the 10K and how that actually impacts legal. And the last thing, just tech fluency. It's really about living in this space and becoming quote unquote tech native. So whether it's pursuing additional certifications or just putting yourself in a position within the organizations that you're in that allows you to interface more with the IT department. So you're sort of at the tip of the spear when new initiatives are coming down in this world.
Um, Excellent. One of the first slides in the video talked about the idea of driving in three lanes. Gio, I believe the Autobahn uh, metaphor may have been one that came up from you. Can you drill down on that and what does driving in those three lanes look like on a daily basis?
And it actually is tangentially related to the question that was just asked about, how one speaks and the different competencies that one has. And so, yes, there are days in which I'm speaking only technology, and it's because that's what my schedule looks like for the day. And I need to have a deep conversation about not just AI. It could be anything about data analytics. It could be knowing what is in the marketplace, of what technology to bring in, for instance, that can generate deliverables, can generate work product that you could file with the court, or having discussions about what prompts we can put in to reduce hallucinations. You need to have that tech competency, as well as, and I would argue even more so than a legal competency, a financial competency. One of the core requirements of this position isn't filing a brief with the court. It's being able to have conversations with the C-suite about, our spend, what we need to forecast and plan for next year over the course of the next 3 years, strategic planning. Something, by the way, that also I don't think that legal ops was part of discussions 5 years ago, that I'm now part of strategic planning processes. But I need to understand the financial terms and lingo that are used. And I will confess, as a licensed lawyer, lawyers are not the best at numbers. I don't think that's a
No.
surprise to a lot of folks that are JDs or licensed lawyers. And so for me, in order to grow up, I had to grow out first. And so, Escort, to your point, I do remember 15 years ago reading a lot of 10Ks and 10Qs and prospectuses and understanding what is this, right? But it comes to you over time, particularly when you surround yourselves with individuals that speak that language. And so there are days that I absolutely, you would not know that I'm a licensed lawyer. You would think that I work in the financial sector or that I work in the tech sector. You just have to be able to, really speak with not just a proficiency, but a fluency in those three different lanes.
Excellent. And in our prep session, you drew a distinction between finance and accounting that is worth a repeat.
Yes, and so, and this is also speaks to how I think the role has changed in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, it was with an accounting lens that we looked at numbers. And so it would be presenting a report saying, this is how much money we spend, and you try to figure out, well, based on the number of matters, this is how much we're likely going to spend next year. And so, but it was really looking back, all the reporting, all the dashboards, and we had dashboards forever. The dashboards were looking at the historical spend of how things existed. Finance is a different it's a different study altogether. It's forward thinking, to not look backwards, but to look forward and say, this is what we think that we're going to spend, right? And so, the accounting isn't looking at data analytics per se. It's literally looking at receipts and accounting and bookkeeping, whereas finance is very much forward thinking about, forecasting, financial forecasting. And I alluded to earlier, what are we going to settle a case for? What do we think our outside counsel spend is going to be on this? If we, assume a 3, 4, 5% rate increase year over year, what is this going to cost us? And so it really is one looking backwards versus the other looking forward.
Excellent. Another question. How do the shifts you're talking about in the head of legal ops role impact the way these positions, departments are engaging outside counsel? Gio, I think that's a question for you.
So how I work with outside counsel quite a bit, and in lots of ways, it's truly, I'll say this, it's a privilege. Besides my CLO, I don't think there's anybody in the legal department that has the visibility across our entire preferred provider program as me. And it is because, so if you're the VP of labor and employment, you know your labor and employment firms. You don't necessarily know your entire outside counsel bench. And besides the CLO, I'm the only person within the department that has that exposure to outside counsel. And so it was said earlier about vendor management, and that's true. But it is really, really knowing the vendors, where they work well, where they don't work well, and be able to counsel and advise my CLO or any of the other legal leaders in the department about, this is what I think they're doing well or they're not doing well. And so it is really embedding myself in our outside counsel, learning how they operate, and just also, and part of this, earning the trust of my internal customers, right? The attorneys, when they have an issue on a bill, I become bad cop. And so it is, I mean, I'm good cop in one sense. I with a smile on my face, I say, no, we're not going to pay you. And that is part of the job of just being the financial rigor and discipline within the department. But it's, I'm also the face of our preferred provider program.
Excellent. Escort, in the intro slide, there was a reference to a trifecta of skills, and we've talked about that a bit. I want to talk about a real life situation for some general counsel. One, there's a bit of a disconnect, sometimes small, sometimes large, between the general counsel and the helo. The general counsel says to the helo, whereas traditionally it has been, here's the strategy, you execute. Now that conversation can sound more like, you need to help me create the vision, and it's your job to create the first draft. And I'm looking for you to manage the process of creation of the vision on down to the execution. So, Escort, for you, how can you interview a candidate to make sure that they have the ability to literally come up with the vision for the chief legal officer to be able to respond to?
So we've used the word architect a few times here, and it's sort of interchangeable for a lot of things we're describing, but I'm going to add a few additional words here. The first one is sounding board, right? Because what you just described, Lloyd, is really the general counsel turning to this person as a sounding board. And you wouldn't expect that someone whose title is head of legal operations would be the sounding board, but maybe we replace that title with something like chief operating officer of the legal function, to add to the gravitas here, right? So in order to allow this person to truly work effectively and start from ideation to creation of the strategy all the way through implementation in partnership with the general counsel, we got to really think about this role as maybe being a little bit bigger than what we are currently talking about. And I think that as you look at compensation, it's probably already reached that point. But that's sort of my initial just knee-jerk reaction to the question here.
Gio, I'm sure that you've heard many of your peers talk about that heightened expectation. In some instances, the people are able to meet the expectation, others not. Any thoughts or insights you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think that the most effective helos, one, drive innovation, right? And when I say drive, they're the ones, sounding board, I love that, are presenting the ideas. I was just in a class earlier this morning, and somebody said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I said, well, why not? Right? Can't we improve it? I mean, of course, it might mean you don't prioritize something that's not broken, but we can always make something better. And so, this is really, the architect is really helping drive innovation, and maybe at its core, leading change management. And perhaps one of the most difficult aspects of the job is being able to get the department and the rest of the folks in the department and even outside on board with whatever that change or innovation is. And so part of that is being the storyteller, to try to be able to get folks on board. So,
Escort, in any of your research, have you been able to get a sense of the increase of the size, not only of the role, but of the number of people who report into the role, which is going to get to the competency of leadership capabilities. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So, I'll describe this company as a large player in the pharmaceutical space, very well known, maybe even a household name. But this company has been very public about just the importance of AI across the business. There's not just in the legal function, but the real impact of this is being felt in the legal function more than anywhere else. As it currently stands, the head of the legal operations within that particular department, this person's leading AI enablement across the entire business in a real cross-functional way. In order to support his mission, he currently has the most reports within the legal function as you think about everybody else reporting into the chief legal officer. And it's probably going to expand slightly. I think the number that we're seeing is somewhere between 7 FTEs at the moment. That's a very big remit, and it tells you just the importance that they are putting in the value that they're placing in what AI can do for their business, but more importantly, how the legal operations leader and his use of AI enablement is impacting their business.
How do you, in interviewing candidates, especially when you get down to the final four, be able to create distinctions between people who are really good at leading others and people who are okay?
Typically, at the final stage of an interviewing process, we're looking for just slight degree differences, right? You're not going to see someone who's essentially a B in leadership and management, and then another person who's an A plus. That our process allows us to just ensure there's a very close group of cohorts who are going through this. But there are several things that we do. In addition, I mentioned the behavioral interview, but we utilize questionnaires, we utilize other assessments. They're proprietary to MLA to ensure that we're truly getting to know how someone has functioned in the past, right? How many reports have you managed over the course of your career? Do you enjoy managing others? Tell us about your philosophy on mentorship. How do you manage a performance review process where you're walking into a room and you're telling someone that they're underperforming? It's really figuring out how this person performs in those settings and in those instances. And that tells us how they may respond in a certain situation. And of course, we're not the decision makers. We are the consultants here. So we put all of this to our clients and allow them to make a decision. More importantly, with all the data points of this reference, we allow our clients to really frame questions around this to discover things that may not be apparent in the data set, as opposed to having to draw inferences themselves.
Oh, great. Interesting question. One person said, I am not where I probably should be with respect to some of these new skills that you're talking about. What are some of the things that I can do to upskill where I am if I want to be an effective helo, not only of the past, but of the future? Gio, any thoughts on what people can do to upskill?
I would encourage folks to, there's lots of resources out there and free resources at that that you can look for on the internet about what's going on in the AI space. Go into ChatGPT and put in the prompt, what are legal technologies that are being used in legal departments, and it will spit out a list to you of a number of things. Go and learn what those technologies do. Schedule a demo even for yourself to see what's in the marketplace. And I would add that those technologies are changing literally every day, every 6 months. There's a conference that I used to go to that would showcase hundreds of vendors. And you see the different technologies. Go sit on a demo and see what's possibly out there. Even myself, and I've been in this space for a long time, I am blown away year after year after year of the new things that folks are coming up with and how to provide efficiencies to departments. If you're looking to grow in the financial space, or your knowledge or acumen in the financial space, you could read a prospectus, although I will say it is not the most enjoyable read if you look at what a public filing is, but the lingo and the terminology. Again, you can look at what does a presentation look like to the C-suite when you're talking about financing, understanding what accruals are, understanding, just various budgeting, bottoms up budgeting, and the different types of terms that are used in the financial space. And if the area that you need to learn is law, again, I'll say it, I'm not necessarily writing legal briefs, right? But I need to be able to understand at a high level what happens in a legal case and educating yourself about the role of attorneys within law firms. What does mediation mean? What does settlement mean? I mean, really, you don't need to have, the knowledge in this space needs to be, a mile long versus an inch deep type of a thing. You don't necessarily need to be the lawyer who's going to go into the room, but proficient enough to be able to speak to lawyers about the law, about technology and finances, how it relates to the law. I would encourage folks to go out there, and happy to connect afterwards about different, in the public domain, a lot of this material exists.
Excellent. Escort, in the difference between the two job descriptions, there was a specific reference to MBA and the AI enabled. Can you speak to that? There's a lot of discussion in some Hilo circles about how important, what's more important, a JD and MBA. What are your thoughts and insights on the actual credentials?
So I think in the description it says JD or MBA preferred, right? So it becomes a either or, while as in the initial document that we created, it was just JD preferred. Um, that requirement speaks to everything we've talked about here today. It's about having someone that has that financial literacy. So if you have an MBA, it sort of negates the need to get up to speed on what's in a 10K because you already understand that language completely, and reading that document becomes so much easier. It also gives you the credibility to have those conversations about finances and data in a way that you would not be able to otherwise. But truly, you don't have to go to business school, and there are probably better ways you could spend $100,000 annually, right? So in order to make up for that, there's Khan Academy probably has a course that mirrors what an MBA may look like. There are a number of equally impactful vendors, I'll call them, that replicate MBA level education minus the MBA cost. But just you got to think very creatively about how you actually plug that gap.
Excellent. And so, as we close, one final question that I'll direct to both of you. So, let's say that you are asked by either the CAO of the company or the COO or the CEO to say, can you help us think through, along with the CLO, what are the two or three most important things for the head of legal ops to do and to help execute on and drive over the course of the next 3 years? Gio, I'll go to you first. What are some of the top two or three priorities for the Hilo of the future, and some companies the present, to be able to do?
I think, the top of mind one, I think perhaps the most important thing forward thinking is around knowledge management. And because AI is omnipresent in everything that we do, how do I get my legal department proficient in technology, proficient in AI, and proficient in how to use it? And I've heard several folks say AI isn't going to replace, AI is not going to replace lawyers who know how to use AI, but it will replace lawyers who don't know how to use AI. And I think that's very true as we are evolving as a society and having to leverage AI specifically. And so for me, one of the most important things that I could do is get my department leveled up on being proficient in the use of AI. And of course, accepting of AI perhaps as a precursor before actually use and implementation, but that might be perhaps the most important thing that I could do within my space. And secondly, being apprised of what's out there in all of the technologies, because it is such an ever-changing landscape that I myself need to be kept abreast of, what is good for the department.
Excellent. Escort.
So two things come to mind, and the first one, it's sort of echoing what Gio said in a sense, but it's creating a real AI game plan. Like, how do we go from point A? And I'm assuming point A here is that we're AI curious, but we haven't really picked a solution or a go-to model. How do we go from that to becoming truly AI literate? I.e., we're experimenting with a tool. Everyone across the organization has access to enterprise-grade artificial intelligence tool sets behind our firewall, whether it's in a sandbox environment or actually in live production. The next one is, and that's, by the way, that's not a 90-day plan. That's just a game plan to get us there. But that could be a 12 to 24-month process to actually get to a point where you could really say that we are quote unquote AI literate. The next thing is really analyzing the data you already have in hand. If you're not already doing this, there's so much potential to just there's so much value that can be added by just getting to know yourself, quote unquote, yourself a little bit better by going through that data with a real analytical mindset, right? So it's discovering what's the known knowns, what are the known unknowns, and of course, what are the quote unquote unknown unknowns. You may be surprised where you're spending money and where you're bleeding actual value in legal. You may be surprised by just realizing, hey, maybe we actually embed this attorney within this business division so they're a little bit closer to the action. And we were not aware of that because we were not actually looking at the patterns and the trend lines here with any real rigor. And the last one, well, I think if you don't mind, we'll settle on two because that's probably a lot to think through.
Oh, no, no, go ahead. No, please go ahead.
The last one, maybe going back to just the core foundation of this, it's thinking about what is the quote unquote external ecosystem supporting our company from a legal perspective, whether it's consultants, whether it's vendors, law firms, etc. How have they performed historically, and maybe how do we upgrade? Whether we have recent litigation that we're not particularly thrilled with. Who are the external partners that we may want to bring into the fold? So it's now looking a little bit outside of your current company and thinking about other places where you could find those partnerships to be more effective and drive value. So it's going back to what the role may have looked like in the past, but Gio said earlier, if it ain't broken, don't fix it, right? Maybe it's not exactly that, but we could certainly do a slight upgrade and a slight update to ensure that we're utilizing the best model possible.
Excellent. And so we will close with two words, thank you. First, thank you to Escort and Gio. You spent a lot of time and a lot of thought helping prepare and deliver today's session. I'm very, very grateful to you. I'm thankful to all of the listeners. And finally, thank you to the convener of today's session, Justice Bid. If anybody wants to know more about Justice Bid, please put a note in the chat, or we will be contacting you. Once again, thank you, everybody, and have a great day. Bye-bye now.